Chapter 1. The Silence Beyond Earth. The engines hummed with a steadiness that felt almost merciful, not loud enough to overwhelm thought, not quiet enough to forget where he was. Commander Yao Ati sat strapped into the launch seat of the Odyssey, his gloved hands resting calmly on his thighs as the final systems check echoed through the cabin. Outside, Earth waited, blue, whole, unaware. Yao closed his eyes. He had trained for this moment for 13 years. Simulations, centrifuges, isolation chambers, endless evaluations of body and mind. None of them had prepared him for the weight in his chest now. Not fear, exactly. Reverence, perhaps, the kind that came when a man realized he was standing at the edge of something far larger than himself. "Commander, 30 seconds, Mission Control said. Yao whispered a prayer, barely louder than breath. "Lord, you were here before the stars were named. Be with me now." He was not the most outwardly religious man on the crew. He did not quote scripture over shared meals or correct others when God was spoken of vaguely as an idea rather than a presence. His faith had always been quieter than that, something carried inward, like a compass no one else could see. Still, it was the reason he was here. The signal that had changed everything, an ordered, repeating transmission from beyond the Epsilon Eridani system, had fractured humanity's certainty overnight. Scientists argued, governments maneuvered, philosophers filled columns with speculation. And somewhere in the noise, Yao had felt something unmistakable, a calling. He remembered sitting alone in the observatory chapel at the Johnson Space Center after the announcement, staring at a simple wooden cross against steel walls. Space agencies rarely built chapels anymore, too old-fashioned, too specific. Yet it remained, quiet and unused. He had prayed then, too. "Send someone else," he had said, "someone stronger, someone without doubts." The answer had not come in words, it never did, but peace had followed, heavy and undeniable. Now the countdown reached its end. Launch. The force pushed him back into the seat as fire carried him upward, tearing him away from the only world he had ever known. The roar of ascent swallowed everything, thought, memory, even prayer. Then suddenly, silence, weightlessness. Yao opened his eyes. Earth filled the viewport, suspended in darkness like a promise and a warning all at once. He had seen it before in training and in previous missions, but never like this. Never knowing he would not return for years. Perhaps never at all. "Orbit achieved," came the calm voice of the flight engineer. The crew began their checks, practiced movements performed with professional ease. Yao listened, responded, led. This was the version of him the world trusted, commander, engineer, problem solver. But inwardly, another silence grew. As the Odyssey aligned for its burn toward deep space, Yao allowed himself one final look. He thought of his mother's voice during childhood prayers, steady and certain. He thought of church pews warmed by sunlight, of hymns sung without urgency. He thought of a God who spoke light into existence long before humanity dared to chase it. What awaited them beyond the stars was unknown, not merely unexplored, but unimagined, and that was what unsettled him most. If intelligent life truly existed out there, if the signal was not coincidence or echo, then humanity was not alone in creation. The question was not whether that reality threatened faith. Yao believed truth never did. The question was whether humanity was prepared to meet it with humility. The engines ignited again, gently this time, nudging the Odyssey away from Earth's embrace into the vast, unbroken dark. Yao bowed his head, unseen by the crew. "Into your hands," he murmured, "even here." Beyond the hull, the stars waited, silent, ancient witnesses to a journey that had only just begun.
Chapter 2. The Signal That Would Not Fade. The signal returned on the third day. Not louder, not clearer, simply persistent. Yao stood at the central console of the Odyssey, eyes fixed on the data stream as it scrolled across the display. Around him, the ship moved in its quiet rhythm, fans cycling, instruments murmuring, human life reduced to controlled systems and careful routines. "Confirmed source?" he said. "Confirmed," the communications officer replied. "Same coordinates, same structure, no drift." Yao exhaled slowly. 3 days earlier, the transmission had been written off as residual noise, an echo distorted by distance, or a rare but natural cosmic pattern. Humanity had cataloged stranger things before, but echoes did not repeat with intention. This signal did. It arrived at precise intervals, always after local midnight ship time, as if keeping a clock no one aboard had set. Each burst carried the same mathematical symmetry, layered frequencies, nested sequences, pauses that were too deliberate to be accidental. Language without words, order without explanation. "Confirm any variation at all?" Yao asked. "None we can detect. It's patient." That word lingered in the air longer than it should have. Yao moved closer to the screen. The pattern unfolded again, graceful in its precision, unsettling in its calm. It reminded him strangely of scripture passages he had memorized as a child, genealogies, psalms, repetition used not for emphasis, but for grounding, as if the truth needed no embellishment. "Log it," he said. "Mark it as priority 1. A pause followed. "Commander," the science lead said carefully, "Mission Control still hasn't authorized active engagement. We're observers only." Yao nodded. He had expected that. "I'm aware. We observe, we log, nothing more." Yet as the signal faded again into silence, he felt the weight of the words settle uncomfortably in his chest. Observation was never neutral. Later, alone in the narrow quiet of his sleep module, Yao replayed the transmission through his personal console. Without the noise of the breach, the signal felt different, more intimate somehow. He closed his eyes and listened, not with instruments, with memory. He thought of the first time he had heard the story of creation spoken aloud, not read, spoken. How the repetition of "and God said" carried a rhythm that felt older than language itself. Speech as act, word as force. The signal pulsed again. Yao's console translated nothing, offered no meaning, and yet the longer he listened, the less random it felt. He found himself whispering without realizing it. "What are you?" The silence that followed felt attentive. Yao opened his eyes. A chill ran through him, not fear, but recognition, the uncomfortable awareness that he might not be listening alone. He shut down the playback and leaned back against the wall, hands resting loosely in his lap. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, he prayed. "God of all creation," he murmured, "if this is not from you, give us wisdom to turn away. And if it is, give us humility enough to listen." The ship drifted onward, indifferent to his words.
Outside, the stars burned with ancient steadiness, unmoved by human questions. But deep in the Odyssey's systems, the signal waited, unchanged, unhurried, unanswered. Chapter 3. Distance and Authority. Mission Control called on the 6th day. The delay was intentional. Yao knew that before the encrypted channel even opened. Earth always took its time when decisions felt heavy enough to reshape history. Distance made that easier. From 40 light-years away, uncertainty could be treated like a problem instead of a presence. "Commander Ati," the director's voice said, steady and practiced. "We've reviewed your logs." Yao remained still, hands folded behind his back as he stood in the communications bay. The crew was elsewhere, purposefully so. Some conversations were not meant for shared space. "Yes, Director," he said. "There is consensus," she continued. "The signal demonstrates intentional structure. However, we have found no evidence of semantic content. At this stage, it is to be treated as a non-interactive phenomenon." Non-interactive. Yao tasted the words before responding. "Understood." "You are not to respond to the signal in any form. No modulation, no alteration of output, no attempts to call and response. Observation only." A pause. "Is that clear, Commander?" "Yes," Yao said. "It's clear." The channel closed with a soft chime. For several seconds, Yao did not move. Authority had always been a simple thing for Yao. Orders existed to preserve life, to prevent chaos, to protect the fragile chain of trust that kept people alive in hostile places. He had followed them across deserts, oceans, and orbit. But this felt different. Not wrong, just incomplete. He returned to the bridge and took his seat. The Odyssey continued its steady glide, engines silent, momentum carrying them deeper into a region of space no human vessel had ever crossed. "Any activity?" he asked. "No change," the communications officer replied. "Signal remains consistent." Yao nodded. Later that cycle, he floated alone in the observation dome, Earth long gone from view. The stars here were unfamiliar, brighter in some places, absent in others. Patterns he had grown up knowing no longer applied. He pressed a hand lightly against the transparent surface. Scripture came to him unbidden. The heavens declare the glory of God. He had always loved that verse, loved its certainty, the idea that creation spoke without language, testified without effort. But what did it mean when creation appeared to speak back? He thought of Abraham, told to leave everything familiar without explanation. Of Moses, warned to remove his shoes because the ground itself had become holy. Of prophets who hesitated, not because they doubted God, but because they understood the weight of being heard. Yao wondered if obedience was always silence, or if sometimes silence was the safer choice. The signal pulsed again, right on schedule. He did not turn toward it. He remained where he was, suspended between starlight and shadow, caught between the authority of Earth and the quiet insistence of something older. Something that did not issue commands. Something that simply waited. Chapter 4. The Threshold of Knowing. The Odyssey crossed into the Epsilon Eridani system without ceremony. No alarms sounded. No great shift announced itself. Space remained what it had always been, vast, silent, indifferent to human expectation. And yet, everything felt different. Yaw stood on the bridge as the first stellar readings populated the displays. The star burned brighter than Sol, its light sharper, less forgiving. Planets emerged one by one from the darkness, rock, gas, ice, ancient forms shaped long before humanity learned to name the sky. There, the navigation officer said softly. A faint object appeared near the outer edge of the system. Not a planet, not debris. Its orbit was too precise, its position too deliberate. The source. Yaw felt his pulse slow as he studied the readings. The signal strengthened here, no longer struggling against distance. It wrapped around the ship's instruments with calm persistence, as if acknowledging their arrival without celebration. "Maintain distance," he said. The crew complied without question. They had trained for restraint as much for action. Hours passed. The object revealed little of itself. It emitted no visible light, no propulsion trace, no radiation spike that would suggest machinery as humans understood it. And yet the signal continued, unchanged, unwavering. "It's not a beacon," the science lead said quietly. "At least not in any conventional sense." Yaw nodded. He had reached the same conclusion. Beacons were meant to guide. This felt more like a presence. Later, alone again, Yaw reviewed the data streams in silence. Patterns folded into patterns, elegant in their restraint. There was no escalation, no attempt to force attention, just continuity. He remembered standing once at the edge of the Atlantic as a child, watching the tide move in and out. The ocean had not called to him, not spoken his name. It had simply existed. The comparison unsettled him more than fear would have. The ship drifted closer, still within safe limits, still obedient to Earth's directive. The signal now permeated every system, not interfering, not dominating, merely present. Yaw closed his eyes. For the first time since launch, he did not pray for guidance. He prayed for restraint. Let me not confuse wonder with command. Let me not mistake silence for permission. The object remained motionless. So did the signal. And Yaw understood with quiet certainty that they had crossed a threshold, not of distance, but of knowing. There would be no return to ignorance now, no way to pretend the universe was empty of intention. Whatever this was, it had allowed itself to be found, and that, he realized, was its first answer. Chapter 5. Faith Under Command. The order arrived without ceremony. A compressed data packet routed through layers of authentication marked "Immediate compliance required." Yao read it once, then again. Then he closed his eyes. "Commander," the science lead said carefully, "Mission Control is requesting confirmation." Yao inhaled, slow and measured. "Confirmed," he said. "I've received it." The directive was precise, surgical. They were to deploy a passive resonance probe, nothing that could be construed as communication, nothing that would provoke response. The goal was simple: determine whether the signal reacted to proximity or interference. Interaction without intent. A technical compromise designed to soothe unease on Earth. Yao issued the commands. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, trusting his judgment without knowing the weight pressing against it. The probe launched in silence, a small instrument drifting toward the object, like a question wrapped in caution. Data streamed back immediately. Unchanged frequencies, unchanged patterns. No response. Minutes passed. Then the signal shifted. Not in intensity, in structure. The change was subtle enough to miss. One pause lengthened, one nested sequence reconfigured itself, aligning not with the probe, but with the Odyssey. "Commander," the communications officer said, voice low, "we're seeing a deviation." Yao's eyes fixed on the display. The signal was no longer merely repeating, it was adjusting. A stillness settled over the bridge, the kind that preceded storms or confessions. Yao felt it in his chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with fear. This was not reaction, it was recognition. "Log everything," he said quietly. The probe continued its silent drift, now irrelevant. The signal stabilized again, but something essential had changed. The message, if it could be called that, had acknowledged them without engaging the tool they had sent, as if refusing the language of instruments, as if insisting on something else. Later, alone, Yao replayed the sequence again and again. The adjustment was unmistakable, intentional, measured. He thought of the burning bush that was not consumed, of a voice that spoke without thunder, of commandments delivered not through force, but through presence. Mission Control would want answers. He had none he could transmit without consequence. Yao knelt in the narrow space beside his console, ignoring the ache in his joints, the absurdity of posture in zero gravity. "Father," he whispered, "I have followed every order I was given, but I don't know whose authority I'm standing in now." The ship remained silent. The signal did not change again, but Yao knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that obedience alone would no longer be enough. Chapter 6. The Weight of Witness. Yao slept poorly after the signal changed. Dreams came in fragments, light without source, voices without sound, motion without distance. He woke before the ship's cycle shifted, suspended in the dim glow of standby lighting, heart steady, but mind unsettled. Some knowledge did not announce itself loudly. Some simply remained. On the bridge, the crew spoke less than usual. Data scrolled, systems hummed. No one mentioned the deviation directly, but everyone felt its gravity. The signal continued its pattern, stable, restrained, like a hand resting on a closed door. Mission Control called again. This time the channel remained open longer. "Commander Ati," the director said, "we've reviewed the probe data. We need clarification." Yao stood straight, hands clasped behind him. "The signal altered its structure," she continued, "yet it did not respond to the probe itself. Can you account for that?" Yao chose his words carefully. "It responded to presence, not intrusion." Silence followed. "That distinction is speculative," the director replied. "Yes," Yao said evenly, "but it's consistent." Another pause. "Commander," she said, "you are not tasked with interpretation. You are tasked with compliance." "I understand." "Then understand this. You are not to attribute intent, intelligence, or agency to this phenomenon. Not in logs, not in recommendations." Yao felt the words settle like stone. "Understood," he said. The channel closed. He remained still long after the signal ended. To witness something and deny its nature felt like a different kind of disobedience, not against command, but against truth. Later, Yao returned to the observation dome. The object remained motionless, unchanging against the star's sharp light. The signal pulsed softly, no longer unsettling in its rhythm. almost patient. He thought of Job, confronted not with answers, but with scale, of questions that revealed how little certainty was owed to human understanding. Yao did not feel chosen, he felt entrusted. That realization carried weight. Witnesses were not granted authority, they were granted responsibility. He spoke aloud, knowing no one could hear him. If I speak, I will be judged. If I remain silent, I will still answer for it. The stars offered no counsel. The signal continued, neither urging nor retreating. Yao understood then that the test before him was not whether he would obey orders, it was whether he would tell the truth when obedience demanded restraint, and whether faith could endure the cost of being seen. Chapter 7. When Silence Becomes a Choice. The decision did not come all at once. It formed slowly, in the space between routine tasks and unspoken thoughts, between what Yao was ordered to do and what he now understood he had witnessed. The signal did not change again. That, more than anything, pressed on him. It neither escalated nor withdrew. It did not demand attention or punish restraint. It simply remained, unchanged by compliance, unaffected by denial. Yao began to understand that silence itself could become a response. Mission Control sent another directive, this one narrower, more cautious, a recalibration of sensors, a deeper scan. Still no communication, still no acknowledgement of intent, still observation. Yao complied. But as he reviewed the data late in the ship's cycle, he noticed something Earth could not see from 40 light-years away. The signal aligned itself consistently with the Odyssey's internal clock. Not the probe's timing, not the star's rotation. Theirs. The realization settled quietly. This was not coincidence. He recorded the observation in a private log, separate from official transmission, not to conceal truth, but to preserve it until he understood the cost of speaking. In the observation dome, he folded his hands and bowed his head, not in ritual, but in recognition. "You see us," he said aloud, "and you wait." He did not know whether the signal represented creation responding to its creator, or something else entirely. He only knew that reverence, once awakened, demanded honesty. If he remained silent, he would preserve order. If he spoke, he would fracture it. History had never been kind to witnesses who spoke too soon. The signal pulsed again, unchanged. Yao straightened. Silence, he realized, was no longer neutral. It had become a choice.
Chapter 8. The Cost of Being Heard. Yao transmitted the message during the ship's quietest cycle. Not as speculation, not as interpretation, as testimony. He stripped the language of metaphor and restraint, reducing it to observation alone, timings, alignments, deviations that could not be explained by proximity, instrumentation, or chance. He included nothing of what he felt, only what could be measured. Even so, the truth carried weight. He sent it through official channels, signed his name, and waited. The response did not come immediately. When it did, it was brief. Mission Control acknowledged receipt. No questions, no discussion. A directive followed within minutes. Stand by, further instructions pending. Yao closed his eyes. Being heard, he realized, was not the same as being understood.
The ship continued its silent drift. The object remained still. The signal pulsed, steady, patient, unchanged, not troubled by human exchange. The crew felt the shift before it was spoken aloud. Conversations grew careful, movements slowed. Everyone sensed that a line had been crossed, even if no one named it. Another transmission arrived. Yaw read it once, then again. He was relieved of command, effective immediately. No accusation, no rebuke. The language was precise, professional, and final. Authority transferred to the executive officer. Yaw was ordered to relinquish all discretionary control and remain confined to non-operational areas for the safety of the mission. Yaw complied. He removed his insignia alone in his quarters, placing it carefully on the small shelf beside his console. The gesture felt heavier than ceremony. Titles were easy to give up. Witness was not. As he sat in stillness, the signal pulsed again, steady, patient, unchanged. Yaw did not feel abandoned. He felt seen. And for the first time since launch, he understood the cost of obedience that did not align with command. Faith, he realized, was not proven by agreement. It was proven by faithfulness under loss. He bowed his head, not in defeat, but in surrender. Let me speak only what is true, and accept whatever follows. Beyond the hull, the stars burned on, indifferent to rank or recognition. The signal waited, and Ya'ati remained, a witness without authority, carrying a truth that could no longer be unspoken.
Chapter 9. Beyond the Answer. The Odyssey did not turn back. Even without Yao's command, the mission continued along its plotted course, engines firing in measured silence. Protocol endured. Humanity advanced. And Yao-Ati watched. Confined to observation, he spent his days listening to the hum of the ship, to the steady breath of systems designed to outlast uncertainty, and to the signal that had never once demanded his attention. It remained. Not louder, not clearer, faithful. Earth transmitted new directives, stripped of urgency now, framed in technical language that avoided implication. The data Yao had sent was archived, categorized, and distributed to committees that would deliberate carefully, safely, from light years away. Truth, he knew, moved slowly when it threatened order. From the observation dome, he watched the object as the ship passed its closest allowable distance. There was no farewell, no escalation, no sign that the moment mattered. And yet Yao felt no disappointment. Some truths did not require acknowledgement to remain true. He thought of Christ before Pilate, silent not because he lacked authority, but because authority did not require defense. Of seeds cast into soil, unseen long after the sower had moved on. The signal pulsed again. Yao closed his eyes. He did not pray for answers. He prayed for endurance. Days later, as the Odyssey prepared to exit the system, the signal shifted one final time. Not toward the ship, toward the star. The pattern reconfigured,
aligning itself with the star's natural emissions, folding seamlessly into the light that had burned there long before humanity had learned to listen. The signal did not end. It became part of what already was.
Thank you for listening. This story stands on its own, but more journeys await.